Matthew chapter 24, verse 1. While you're turning there, last week we talked about from chapter 23 the curses that Jesus issued to the scribes and the Pharisees there in 23. Those woes, pretty harsh, because not only are they going to miss heaven if they continue down that path, it's like they're shutting the door to other people and keeping them from going to heaven too. They're preying on those people who really needed their help in the church, which are widows and orphans, those type of people, perverting the true gospel, trying to make proselytes, trying to make converts, but they were trying to make people like themselves instead of making people who would be like Christ. And it was a false religion that they'd fallen into, and they're using different types of reasoning to undermine truth. You remember they'd swear by things like the temple or something like that, and they'd get or the altar, and then they'd get caught, and they'd say, well, that doesn't mean anything. It had to be the gold of the temple or the sacrifice on the altar, something like that, just a way of justifying their own lies. And they were reversing their priorities. They're putting a huge priority on things like tithing the smallest of herbs. And they had neglected salvation. The most important thing. It doesn't matter how much money you give if you're not saved. That's tithing and giving is for people who are saved. It doesn't help someone who's not saved. And so, but they were focusing on that. You remember they were even guilty of extortion, and they're serving these really clean foods and these really clean dishes and giving it to people, and it was money that they cheated out of other people. It's like it was stolen food even there, and they're just deceiving people. They even did those acts where they whitewashed the tombs a month before the Passover feast in the spring there, so the people traveling into the Jerusalem wouldn't accidentally touch one of those graves there and be defiled and not be allowed to be participants in the celebration of the feast there. And so they did those kind of things, but yet Jesus said, you're full of deadness inside. And so anybody they touched, they corrupted, they defiled in that way, and really pretentious, claiming that they wouldn't have killed the prophets like their fathers did, like their ancestors did. But Jesus knows right now they're trying to kill him. And he said there in Matthew 23:32, fill ye up then the measure of your fathers. I know you're going to do it. Go ahead and do it. It's time. It's just a couple days before his death there. And so that takes us back to chapter 24, and they leave the temple there. They leave Jerusalem area there, and they're going to a more private setting there on the Mount of Olives. And so if you got one of those maps of Jerusalem there, you can see kind of that picture. Jerusalem sits on the mount here, and let me do this backward for you. Jerusalem sits on the mount here. You drop down to the Kidron Valley here, and then back up to the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is actually about 200 feet higher than Jerusalem, and so you can look down from the Mount of Olives right down into the Temple Mount area there, and all of that beauty. That's where they're at. They're up on the Mount of Olives there. And so as you move into Matthew chapter 24 and 25, this is known as the Olivet Discourse. Olivet Discourse. If you've ever heard that phrase before, this is it. Matthew 24 and 25. Why is it called the Olivet Discourse? Because it's from the Mount of Olives, and it's a really long discourse that Jesus gives, and it's actually about the end times, the last days. If you've been with us, we're studying through Revelation, you know we've already covered much of Matthew chapter 24 during that discussion, because it's describing the same things. John just gives us a little more detail about them in the book of Revelation, but it's still the same description there. And so we're going to actually pick up, since we're studying through the questions of Jesus, we're going to pick up a question here at the middle of this discourse and some on into the middle. We're not going to cover all of Matthew chapter 24 and 25 because we're covering that in Revelation on Sunday mornings. But as Jesus is preparing to leave, he's going to give them this information about his second coming. That's what he's given to his disciples there. We're going to read the first 3 verses there, Matthew 24. He says, and Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to shew him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? Now, Jesus' disciples come to him, and they're looking down on Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives there. They're looking down on it, and they're noticing what? What do they notice when they look down on Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives? They're looking at the buildings, the stones, the walls. They have just come, if you've been with us on Wednesday evening, we're studying these questions in chronological order, the best of our ability, so it's not always, right through one gospel and then on to it's not like that. We're skipping around to pick them up in order. But, they're coming down and they're noticing this beautiful sight of the city of Jerusalem and the temple and looking down on that. And Jesus has just left the temple. He's been reaching out to this same groups of people over and over again, reaching out in love, offering them mercy, trying to persuade them that even though many of them are involved in the religious system of Judaism, they're not saved. They've rejected Jesus as the Christ. That keeps them unsaved. It doesn't matter that they go to the temple to worship. It doesn't matter that they're still offering the sacrifices. It doesn't matter what they're giving or any of those things. That doesn't matter. And so Jesus keeps confronting those people about salvation over and over again. And we've seen here recently that most of those parables that he gave were directed at their lost condition, and that they're fakes. They're pretending that. And so he's doing that, and you remember he is pretty blunt with them, pretty harsh, and it's heartbreaking for Jesus to see that. At other times we see him look down on Jerusalem and he weeps because he knows his own people, for the most part, the Jews, have rejected him as the Messiah, and he weeps over it. And so, after Jesus leaves that very serious scene there with those religious leaders, and he travels across the Kidron Valley and back up on the Mount of Olives there, the disciples they're not concerned about that part. They're looking at the buildings. Look how beautiful these are. Look how they're adorned, and they can see the gold and the silver and all those things looking down on beautiful limestone stones there, and white, pretty to look at. And look over in Mark. I'll just read a couple other verses here. These are parallel passages, which means they're talking about the same thing. But Mark 13 and verse 1 is one of them. In Mark 13, verse 1, describing the same event there, says, And as he went out of the temple, one of his disciples saith unto him, Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. And it's that exclamation point. He says, look at those buildings. Look at the stones. Look how amazing. Look over in Luke 21:5. You see another account there in Luke 21 and verse 5. This is Luke's account of the same event. In Luke 21 verse 5, And as some spake of the temple, how it was adorned with goodly stones and gifts, he said. Now, the gifts are the offerings that were made. Those were things that were adorning the Temple Mount. Gold and silver, precious stones, those type of things. And it's adding to the natural beauty of it there and just making it even prettier there for them to see. And so, why are they focusing on those things? Why are they focusing on this beautiful temple, these beautiful buildings, these beautiful stones? And Jesus has been focusing on, you need to get saved. Right? And when they come out, they're focusing on the buildings. Right? In their minds, they look down on it and they're seeing a place that's fit for who? A king. A king. They keep going back to that same thing of Jesus setting up the kingdom. And when they look down from the Mount of Olives, they see all that beauty down there on the Temple Mount, and they're saying, yeah, that's a place fit for a king. This is the ideal spot for the king to set up his kingdom. And they ask him, you say, do you see all the splendor and the beauty in those buildings and those stones? Isn't this just perfect for the kingdom, for the king to be? Yeah. What does Jesus tell them during that? It's all going to be leveled. It's all going to be destroyed. Right? When he tells them that it's going to be destroyed, you look back in Matthew chapter 24. When he tells them that it's going to be destroyed, well, it's odd how they respond to that. Right? Because they say, "Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" Right? They really want the information that Jesus is getting ready to give them about the second coming. Right? They really want to know that about the last days. Right? They do. And they've read the Old Testament prophecies, no doubt. And the Jews in general are just tired of being subject, right, at this time to the Romans. Right? Before that, you can track that all the way back to Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greek, and now Rome. You can track it back to all of those different nations that they've had to be subject to all along. And they're looking every time for the Messiah to deliver them. They're looking for that conquering king to come first and deliver them from whoever's over them. And they're really just done with it at this point. They want the kingdom to come. And, it's interesting when they ask these questions. Sometimes we ask God for something and we think He gives us the wrong answer. Is that just me? Sometimes, sometimes we ask God for something and when He answers us, it didn't really line up with the way we thought it should have played out. Right? And that's what's going to happen here in this verses. It's not what they're hoping for when Jesus gives them this answer. It's not what they've been longing for. It's not what they're expecting from the answer that He gives them. And so, just to kind of put this in perspective, the Jews have some really strong beliefs at this time about the coming of the Messiah. And we see that not just from the Bible, but other historical places, writers like Josephus and different ones. There weren't really Christian writers. They're just historical writers during that period of time. And they write about different things that the Jews believed in. And interestingly enough, they line up with Scripture. What the Scriptures say, the exact same things. And just to give you a point of reference, these are some of the things that the Jews believed in. They believed that the coming of the Messiah would be previewed by a time of tribulation. They believed a time of trouble would happen before the Messiah comes. And the birth pains, as we've been talking about in Revelation, that they were expecting there. The time of pain before the time of joy. If you look over in Zechariah chapter 14, this is one of those prophecies. Zechariah chapter 14, verse 1. Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 1. See this. "Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee, for I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when He fought in the day of battle." And so they're expecting that first part, that tribulation there, where the nations are going to be gathered against their city, and the people, the women are going to be ravished, the houses are going to be rifled, all of those things, and some of them are going to be killed, and some of them are going to be taken captive. And that's the tribulation that they're expecting. Now, besides that, they understand, as we've talked before, the Messiah is to be the son of who? David. The son of David. That's the prophecy in the Old Testament times. That's a messianic title, right? We understand because David called Him Lord, right, that He has to be God also, but He is a descendant of David. And they knew the Messiah was supposed to be a son of David. And when Jesus questioned them about that there, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, they come up with that answer right away. Oh, son of David. Son of David, that's who He is. And of course, Jesus, we understand, is the son of David from both directions, from His mother's side and from His father's side. You can look at Matthew and Luke, and you can track them both back to the same exact place. They're both descendants of David. And so He fits that. But of course the Messiah wasn't going to be David. He was going to be someone like David. And then the next they are expecting a forerunner of the Messiah. Right? The prophecy is about Elijah, right? Or Elias must come. Right? Of course, that's not Elijah either. That's a person like Elijah. Who was that person when Jesus came? Who was the forerunner before Jesus that was like the power of Elias? John the Baptist, right? John the Baptist, right? So they understand that the Messiah would have a forerunner. They believed then that the Messiah would come. After those things happened, they believed the Messiah would come. After that, the nations of the earth would gather against him, just like we read there in Zechariah chapter 14. The Messiah would destroy them. Right? The next thing they believed would happen is that the Messiah would purify Jerusalem. He would cleanse it. Right? That's where his throne is going to be, and he's going to purify it. Then all the Jews that were dispersed around the world would be gathered back to the Messiah there at Jerusalem. Palestine would once again become the center of worship for the world like it was at one time, right? With the Messiah there. And then the Messiah would establish his eternal kingdom. And that would go on into eternity. And that's the sequence of events that most Jews understood, right, about eschatology. Eschatology is a study of end times or the last days. And so that's what they believe. This is how the end times are going to play out, right? What's wrong with that thinking? Nothing, right? That's exactly how it's supposed to play out. And they believe that. Right? And you say, well, if they believe those things, right, how is it that they got so far off track? How is it that they missed their Messiah when he showed up? When Jesus came to the earth, he had the forerunner. And how is it that happened? And so, it isn't that their eschatology or their understanding of end times is wrong. It's just some of the details in the middle are wrong. Right? The Jews believe that they're already under tribulation, that they have been for some time when Jesus shows up, that because of the Romans and the different nations that they've had to be subject to, and especially since the Babylonian captivity. They think they're already living in the tribulation. Well, there's a flaw in that line of thinking, because how long is the tribulation? 7 years, right? The 70th week of Daniel's week of years, 7 years. If this were the tribulation, they've been in it way too long, because it's been longer than 7 years there. But besides that, of course, there's no doubt about Jesus being the son of David. They never argue that throughout Scripture. That's not one of the claims, because they have the records. They keep very accurate records of genealogy, so they know he's the son of David. They couldn't argue that part. And many of them even thought John the Baptist may have been the forerunner for the Christ. They go out into the wilderness to see what John's doing and see the baptisms and all those things. And of course, John recognizes some of them in those false religion and calls them vipers. And he's pretty harsh with them there too. But they do seem to think, okay, there's something different about this guy, and he is introducing Christ. And then Jesus comes on the scene. That's the next event they're expecting, the Messiah to come. And Jesus comes on the scene. He begins healing, doing all these miracles, raising the dead, right? Miracles of creation, feeding multitudes with a very little bit of food, and doing those kind of things. And so the next event, though, that they're expecting would be the ungodly or the heathen of the world to come and attack their Messiah, to gather against him and his people. Now, they think that's going to be Rome. They're the ungodly heathen nation that's over them right now. And they think, okay, Rome is going to come against the Messiah. And if Jesus is the Messiah, he's going to put down the Roman government and those authorities. Is that who is attacking Jesus at this time? Is the Roman government and the Roman authorities, are they coming and attacking Jesus in any kind of way during this time?
No.
No. Why not? Why aren't the Roman authorities doing anything to Jesus? You even see instances where Roman centurions, come to Jesus for help and to heal people and those type of things. They're not persecuting him and his disciples. They're not coming against him. Why is that? Well, Jesus is a law-abiding citizen, isn't he? Yes, he's dwelling in the Roman Empire there. He's obeying the laws of the government. You know, when they question him about paying the taxes, what does Jesus say? Pay your taxes, right? Pay your taxes. You know, he's doing those things. He isn't inciting people against the government. Even when he's sentenced in a couple of days, right? Pilate does everything he can to release Jesus. If you remember the trials there and the crucifixion, the crowds, the Jews, the Jewish leaders, are insisting that they crucify him. And Pilate keeps taking him back there. They examine him and doing all these things. And he comes out and he says, I find no fault in him. And they say, no, crucify him. And he even goes in and has him whipped really harshly, scourged there, brings him out all bloody and hopes that will appease the crowd. That they've just really marred him and bloodied him with those beatings and think, okay, that'll satisfy him. No, it wouldn't satisfy him. And he wanted to release him, but because the crowd insisted on it, they finally did crucify him. But that wasn't the idea of the Roman government. Right? That wasn't. Who are the people that are actually attacking the Messiah at this time? And his disciples. Over and over and over again. The Pharisees, the scribes, right? Those religious leaders in the Jewish religious system, they keep trying to come and trap him in his words. Keep trying to accuse him of doing things wrong. Keep trying to say, oh, your disciples did this and that's not lawful to do. And this, and they keep coming to those. They're the ungodly people that are attacking him, the false religious leaders, right? What happens in the tribulation period that we've been studying about in Revelation? Who leads the attack against God and his people there? The Antichrist, the false prophet, right? The fakes, that same thing, the people involved in the false religious system there. And so they don't understand. The ones leading the attack against God isn't the Romans. It's them. It's them. The next thing is the Messiah would destroy the fakes. Right? Over and over again, Jesus just keeps proving those people are wrong. Right? They keep coming to him and trapping him, and he's humiliated them over and over again by proving them, even by their own standards sometimes, which are absolutely ridiculous. He proves that they're wrong over and over again. He's destroyed their credibility. He's destroyed their reputation with the people. Right? And so, he hasn't physically destroyed them yet. But he's ruining their influence for a lot of the people by doing that there, and that's because they keep insisting on that. They're ignoring the prophecies about the suffering of the Messiah. The Messiah is supposed to suffer. He's supposed to be pierced. Right? He's supposed to die. Right? In John 12, verse 24, we talked about this a few weeks ago. At his triumphal entry, in John 12:24, he rides into Jerusalem there on the colt of a donkey. They're proclaiming the hosannas. Right? There, he says in John 12:24, verily, verily. Now when you see verily, verily, what's that mean? This is very, very important. The word is actually amen, amen. And if you get the amen at the beginning, it usually is translated as verily, which means this is the seal at the beginning of the statement. Right? This is really important. Pay attention to it. And two verilys here. He says, verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. That corn or that piece of grain that he's talking about, dying, is talking about whom? Himself. Then he's going to burst forth with life in the resurrection. And he's trying to tell them, the Christ has to die in order to pay for the sin of the world. The next step would have been the purification of Jerusalem. Right? where is the first place in Jerusalem that this purification will happen? The very first place. Has to be. Has to be. 1 Peter 4:17. For the time is come that judgment must begin at the house of God. And if it first begin at us, what shall the end be of them that obey not the gospel of God? Right? The purification has to begin at the temple first. That's where Christ's throne is going to be, at the temple of God. They're expecting that purification of Jerusalem there, and it's going to start at the temple. Hasn't Jesus already done that? Hasn't He already cleansed the temple of the money changers and the people selling the sacrifices? Hasn't He already done that twice? He has. Right? He has. Right? How did they respond to that? We did it at the beginning of His ministry. Right? 3 years and something later, He comes back. They're still doing it. And He cleanses it again. Right? When He cleanses it the next time, what's their reaction to that? By whose authority did you do that for? Right? Who gave you the right to do that? Right? They weren't accepting that as a purification of the temple. Right? They didn't. The next step would be to gather the dispersed of His people to Himself. Right? Well, that didn't happen, did it? Because the Jews didn't accept Him as the Messiah. That didn't happen. The next step would have been the earthly kingdom of Christ ruling from Jerusalem and Palestine being the center of worship for the world. Of course, that didn't happen either. And then the eternal kingdom. Right? You look at those events there and you say, well, what could have happened? Right? We could have started out with those first few events leading up to Christ's coming there. Right? We could have got to the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. And if God's own people, the Jews, had have accepted Him, what would have happened? Well, I believe He would have cleansed the temple. He would have purged Jerusalem there, destroyed the wicked, set up His kingdom there, and went right into the millennium. I believe that would have happened right after His crucifixion. It kind of reminds me when the children of Israel come out of Egypt during the Exodus. You remember they come out of there and God's leading them with the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, and He's leading them, right? And He takes them across. They do take a little, not just a straight path, but they do take God's directing them a specific way, but He does take them in a matter of days right to the promised land. If they had believed that God would deliver them in the promised land, when would they have went in? Right then. Right then. Instead, when did they actually go in? 40 years later. Right? It could have been right then, the first time. But instead, it happens 40 years later. I believe the kingdom could have been set up right then, after Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, after that purging. But now we're going on almost 2,000 years later, and it hasn't happened yet. We're still waiting for that. Jesus is still going to destroy the wicked from the earth. He's still going to purify Jerusalem, starting with the temple where the Antichrist will have defiled it. He's still going to gather the dispersed from around the world. Palestine will still be the center of worship for the world, and He'll still transfer that right into the eternal kingdom. The events haven't changed. They've just been delayed. Right? They've just been delayed there. And so, these people have no room for the death of the Messiah there. They've got no place for that. They can't understand it. They can't grasp it, that had to happen there. And so after Jesus teaches these lessons about the end times here back in Matthew 24 and 25, we'll see as we move into Matthew 26 in a couple of weeks that this is where Judas Iscariot is out. Because the message he's telling in Matthew 24 and 25 is, it's not now. It could have been now, but it's not now. Because God's people didn't accept it. The Jews have to be a part of that, and they rejected it. And so when Judas finds out it's not now, when you move into Matthew 26, he's out. He says, I've done this long enough. I've pretended to be one of you all long enough because I thought the kingdom was coming. I thought that 100-fold reward was coming that Jesus told us about. I thought we were going to, really be the 12 ruling from the 12 thrones there over the 12 tribes of Israel. That's promised to the apostles there. And, he realizes that's not going to happen right now, and he's just done with it. He just wants whatever he can get out of it, and that's 30 pieces of silver, basically the price of a slave during that day. And so, back in Matthew 23, we didn't read this last week, but I want to back up to it just to see. Matthew 23, verse 38 and 39. Because Jesus says this right before he moves into the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24. He says, in Matthew 23, 38 and 39, Behold, your house is left unto you desolate, for I say unto you, ye shall not see me henceforth, till ye shall say, Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. Now that's a messianic phrase there. Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord, just like they used at the triumphal entry, right there on Palm Sunday. But the disciples don't realize it's been delayed, that the kingdom has been delayed because God's people aren't in line. They're not accepting it. And they don't realize it. They're still clinging on to this hope that this is it. This is the kingdom coming. But Jesus has just said, your house is left unto you desolate. Now he's talking to the Jewish leaders there. You notice in that verse there he calls it your house. He doesn't call it God's house. He doesn't call it the house of the Lord. He doesn't call it his Father's house. Right? He calls it your house. Right? Why is that? It's a fake religion now. Right? God's not really a part of the system of Judaism. Right there. Look over in Ezekiel chapter 9, verse 3. Because I think if we understand what Ezekiel was talking about here, we'll understand why the disciples can't quite grasp that this isn't the kingdom yet. Over in Ezekiel chapter 9, I'm going to pick up a few verses there, but Ezekiel chapter 9 and verse 3. In Ezekiel's prophecy, there's this progression of events. The glory of the Lord appeared where? In the temple. Where did it appear exactly in the temple? Anybody remember? It's almost always, right? The Ark of the Covenant is in the Holy of Holies. Right? Above the Ark of the Covenant is the lid, the mercy seat. Right? Above the mercy seat are the two cherubims, right? With their wings overstretching it, right? And they're looking there, right? And they're looking for blood, right? But the glory of the Lord appears there, between the cherubim, above the mercy seat. Right? Once a year when the high priest goes in with the sacrifice there on the Day of Atonement. So this is the picture. The progression, though, is God's glory leaving the Ark of the Covenant, leaving the temple, leaving the city. Now look at Ezekiel 9:3, and you'll see the cherub there is the cherub over the Ark of the Covenant. But he says, And the glory of the Lord of Israel was gone up from the cherub whereupon he was to the threshold of the house. And he called to the man clothed with linen, which had the writer's inkhorn by his side. God's glory departs from between the cherubim there, and it moves to the threshold. Now what's the threshold? We have a threshold in this building, don't we? It's the doorway. It's the doorway. So it moves from the ark, right, and it moves to the doorway. Right? Look over in Ezekiel chapter 10 and verse 4. Ezekiel chapter 10 and verse 4, he says, Then the glory of the Lord went up from the cherub and stood over the threshold of the house, and the house was filled with the cloud, and the court was full of the brightness of the Lord's glory. So it leaves the Ark of the Covenant. It goes across the threshold. Now where's the court that he's talking about? That's the court of the Gentiles, right? That's outside the actual temple area, right? That's outside of that. So it's moving from the ark to the door, to the courtyard. Look over in Ezekiel 11:23. Ezekiel 11, verse 23. God's glory leaves the threshold, the door of the house of God. It moves to the outer court, and then verse 23 of Ezekiel 11, And the glory of the Lord went up from the midst of the city and stood upon the mountain which is on the east side of the city. Now, God's glory completely leaves the city of Jerusalem and goes to the mountain on the east side. Jerusalem's here, the Kidron Valley, and that mountain over here on the east side is what? The Mount of Olives. There you go. It's left the ark, the door of the temple, the courtyard of the temple, the city of Jerusalem, and it is now on the Mount of Olives. Right? Where is the last place that the glory of Christ is seen on the earth before He ascends back to heaven? The Mount of Olives. He's just on the backside of the Mount of Olives. Jesus has left the temple. He's left the courtyard. He's gone to the Mount of Olives. Right? And, they're looking at this as prophecy. In Zechariah 14:4, I don't want you to turn there because I want you to stay in Ezekiel, because we're going to look at another verse over in Ezekiel 43 if you want to turn over there while we're reading this. But in Zechariah 14 verse 4, where is the place that Jesus is going to come back to the earth, where His feet are going to touch back to the earth at? The Mount of Olives. Right? Zechariah 14:4 says, "And His feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west. And there shall be a very great valley, and half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south." When Jesus' feet touch back down on the earth, He's going to touch right back down on the Mount of Olives where He left from. That mountain is going to cleave in half, from the north to the south, and it's going to pave a valley right straight east and west, which is going to lead directly into the eastern gate of Jerusalem, into the temple there where His throne will be. Now, when the glory of the Lord returns to the earth, you see this prophecy in Ezekiel 43, 2 through 5. I want you to notice the order of this, because it's the reverse order of the leaving. There in chapters 9, 10, and 11. He says in Ezekiel 43, 2 through 5, "And behold, the glory of the Lord, the glory of God of Israel came from the way of the east, and His voice was like a noise of many waters, and the earth shined with His glory. And it was according to the appearance of the vision which I saw, even according to the vision which I saw when I came to destroy the city. And the visions were like the vision that I saw by the river Kabar, and I fell upon my face. And the glory of the Lord came into the house by the way of the gate, whose prospect is toward the east. So the Spirit took me up and brought me into the inner court, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the house." And you see the exact reverse order at Christ coming back, His second coming. He comes to the Mount of Olives. He goes through the east gate, coming into the city. He goes through the courtyard into the inner court, which was where the ark would be, in that inner part there, and the glory of the Lord fills the house there. Now, the disciples, when they leave the Temple Mount, what has just happened? Well, they think this is the prophecy. He's left the temple area. He's left the court. He's come to the Mount of Olives, right? They're looking down on it. They see this beautiful city, and this is fit for a king, and they say, "Oh, here it comes." He's going to start at the Mount of Olives. He's going to work his way right back into the city of Jerusalem. He's going to set up the kingdom, just like Ezekiel's prophecy has said. It's finally here, right? And they understand this city is perfect. It's magnificent. It's beautiful, right? And Jesus has just told them that this place is going to be made what? Desolate. Desolate. Now, He's just said it is going to be made desolate, right? And it doesn't quite comprehend. There are some very massive stones in the temple buildings and walls. Right? If you ever study that, some of them are believed to weigh 100 tons. 100 tons. That's an amazing feat of architecture with the tools they have at that time to be able to build that, let alone to tear it down and rebuild it. Right? Now, it's an amazing feat there. Back in Matthew 24:2, where we began, Jesus said unto them, "See ye not all these things?" There's the question. They've brought attention to these beautiful stones, these beautiful walls, this beautiful city there. And Jesus says there, "See ye not all these things?" Okay, do you see these things? Right? "Verily, This is very important. I want you to pay attention. Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. That's got to be just unimaginable for them to know how long this temple took in the construction and all of the work that went into it. And Jesus now says, okay, you see that? All the stones are going to be taken apart. They're going to be not one put on top of another, right? And so, but just so we understand, and I know Leroy can attest to this too, but some of the stones that are in the city of Jerusalem have been there since Jesus' day. The Western Wall is one example of that, right? And you say, well, what happened? How come Jesus said all the stones, there wouldn't be one on top of another? And then, okay, there's a difference between the retaining wall stones, right? Remember, Jerusalem's built on a mountain, right? And so when Herod expanded all that area, he built these retaining wall stones, right? And then he made a much larger courtyard area, a much larger flat area up on top. And so when you see places like the Western Wall and those type of things, you're looking at the retaining wall stones. You're not looking at the temple stones, those buildings. That's not what you're seeing there. All of those stones were disassembled, taken down, not one on top of another, just like Jesus had said they would. And so, we see how that prophecy was fulfilled. You remember the Jews, they keep this resentment about the tribute tax and all of the things that the Roman government has bound them by, and the laws and the different things, and they've got this just resentment about it all the time. They come to Jesus, you remember, with the Herodians, and they want him to say something ugly or bad about the tribute tax so they can trap him in that and get him in trouble with the government, something along that lines. But it doesn't work. But they've still got that resentment about those taxings and different things inside. You see different people. Zealots were one group that they're kind of like assassin type group. They're trying to kill with the sword, which God said plainly not to do, right? But they're trying to do that and destroy key figures in the government, do those type of things. So, they are always having these little rebellions and these little insurrections, and those keep growing all the time. And you get to about 66 AD, and it's really getting out of hand, and the Roman government steps in and says, no, we've got to stop this problem with the Jews and these insurrections and these rebellions and things. And then by the time you get to 70 AD, the Roman authorities, they want the rebellion of the Jews completely ended. And they come in, they destroy the city of Jerusalem, they destroy the temple there, and you say, well, how did they get every stone one off another? I mean, you can come in and destroy the place without completely disassembling every piece of rock in it, can't you? How did they manage to fulfill that prophecy that Jesus said? Well, when they destroyed Jerusalem and the temple, what did they do? They burn it. They burn it. What happened when they burn it? All that pretty gold and silver and all those things did what? Melted. And it went where? You got all these stones stacked on top of each other, right? There's no mortar in between. Right? And it melts and goes down in the cracks. Right? How did the Roman soldiers get a little extra spoil for their... Well, they took the spoils of the battle, right? You go in and conquer some place, and they get to keep the spoils, right? Get a little extra pay for that. They disassembled the Temple Mount, pulled every stone apart from each other to get the gold and the silver out of the cracks, completely fulfilling Jesus' prophecy about that. Not one stone left on another. And so, but the disciples, they don't see this as a destruction of the city and the temple. I believe they think it's a renovation. That it's going to be taken down and built back right. Now, why do they think it was built wrong in the first place? Who built most of that area on the Temple Mount that they can see? Added a whole bunch of stuff to it and made it a whole lot nicer and fancier than it was when it was Zerubbabel's temple. Right? When you get to this point, they call it what? Even though Zerubbabel's still the one who was over the construction of the temple, they call it what now? Herod's temple. Herod is an Idumean. Right? What's an Idumean? Edomite. Right? Esau's descendants. Right? Not Jacob's descendants. Right? And so you take this group of Jews and they hear this, we're going to take this thing stone by stone. Every stone's going to be taken apart. Right? You can just imagine in their head, okay, we're going to get rid of all the evidence of the Edomite. We're going to get rid of all of Herod's junk, and so it won't be known as Herod's temple anymore. It'll be built back right by God's chosen people, the Jews. Right? And they see it as a renovation. They see it as a renovation. It's going to be remade. They think Jesus is going to remake it with His people, the Jews, instead of an outsider. Matthew 24:3. When they asked this question in verse 3, and as He sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto Him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of Thy coming and the end of the world? It's not like they're dreading the renovation of the Temple Mount. They're excited about it. We want to get this going. Right? When's it going to start? What's going to be the sign of it? When's it going to be official there? Even after Jesus' resurrection. Look over to Acts chapter 1, verse 6. Even after Jesus' resurrection, when He's preparing to go back to heaven, wait for His second coming, the disciples asked this question. Same place, Mount of Olives. Right? They're thinking at any time, okay, it starts from the Mount of Olives. It goes right back into Jerusalem, into the temple. That's how the kingdom starts. That's how the king is set up there. And He's right back there on the Mount of Olives. And they say in Acts 1:6, when they therefore were come together, they asked of Him, saying, Lord, wilt Thou at this time restore again the kingdom to Israel? Right? Is this when it is? Right? We've had the sacrifice that He told them about, and they understand that part now, that was necessary for the gospel, and they say, well, it's ready then. We're here at the Mount of Olives. We can go in at any time. Just lead us in. Right? That's what they're expecting. Luke 19, verse 11. Luke 19:11, this is before this. We studied this earlier, but He says in Luke 19:11, and as they heard these things, He added and spake a parable, because He was nigh to Jerusalem, and because they thought that the kingdom of God should immediately appear. That's what they're thinking. They keep thinking that same thing over and over again. The kingdom is going to appear immediately. The Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24 and 25 is to tell them it's not going to appear now. It's not going to appear. That even when they get to Acts 1, they still can't quite grasp it. And there in verse 3 again of Matthew 24, as He sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto Him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of Thy coming, and of the end of the world? The word coming is parousia, which means be near. It's the present participle, which means they think it's now. Right? Is your coming now? That's what they're thinking. When they ask about the end of the word for world there is aion, right, which is age, the end of the age. The age that we're waiting for the end of before Christ comes back is what? What do we call this age now? The church age, or the time of the Gentiles. Yes, the time of the Gentiles. That's the end of the age. Right? But they think that the earth the age is coming to an end, not the earth. Right? And so when they're talking about the end of the world, we hear things all the time about the end of the world kind of things and Armageddon kind of things. And the world isn't destroyed at the end. It's remade. Right? It's purged by fire, right? And remade. Right? It's not destroyed, gone forever. That's not what it is. It's a new heaven and a new earth. It's remade, completely purged of any evidence of sin. So that's what they're talking about there. The end of the age, when this is going to be remade. The word for end, this is really interesting. I know you won't remember this, but I want to tell it to you anyway because I thought it was really interesting. But the word for the end there is suntelia. Suntelia comes from two Greek words. Suntelia. The telia means the end, or to complete something. That's what telia means. Soon means the final completeness. The final completeness. So when they're talking about the end of the world, they're not just talking about something's being finished or something's being completed. They're talking about the soon telia, the final end, when everything goes back to perfection, when everything goes back to God. Right? Matthew chapter 28, verse 20. Just two more verses before we close. Matthew 28, verse 20. See these same words. Matthew 28, 20. Teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. Amen. Jesus is with us all the way to the final end. The end of everything. We're to keep doing what God tells us to do until the final end. Matthew 13:39. Matthew 13:39. See from similar statement in this parable. He says, the enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. The final end is the final harvest of souls. That's where God separates the true believers from the fakes, the wheat from the tares, the sheep from the goats. That's the separation at the final end there. The destruction of Jerusalem is not the judgment at the end of the age, or the end of the world, as they would call it here in our Bible, but it's a time of judgment for that generation. It's just like the 40 years in the wilderness was the time of judgment for that generation of the nation of Israel that rejected God for that time. The coming kingdom could have happened in the lifetime of those people in Matthew chapter 24. But God's people wouldn't get on board. They wouldn't accept it. They wouldn't be a part of it. And so now that's been delayed. We're waiting for the second coming now. And it'll be the exact same way. Mount of Olives. Right, well, the rapture of the church will happen first, then the tribulation, right, then the Mount of Olives, into the temple, purify it, and God sets up His kingdom. Okay. Any questions? Any comments?